Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing Syria's civil war and the fight against Islamic State in the region. Russia began a bombing campaign last week at the request of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to combat terrorism in his war-torn country. Joining us now from Damascus is Muhammad Ali. He's a Syrian journalist and commentator. With us here in our Washington, D.C. studio is Rasha Elass. She is a Syrian-American journalist who's covered the Middle East for over 10 years. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Let's go to Muhammad in Damascus first. What is the feeling in Damascus over the Russian intervention? Is there a feeling that this is going to save President Bashar al-Assad?
Well, first of all, in general, if you speak with the Syrian people on the ground here, on the streets, in the markets about the Russian participation in the fight against terrorism, they seem to be welcoming this participation for many reasons. First, it is not an intervention or an illegitimate intervention in Syria's affairs. It is part of fighting terrorism, and it will save them from terrorism, the Syrian people. And of course, we know that such a participation came upon a request by the Syrian government. The Syrian president sent for Russia to help the Syrian government and the Syrian army in fighting terrorism using its air force. And this is, of course, a participation according to international law, and also it is abiding by of course, UN Charter, not like the US-led coalition, which did not take the permission of the Syrian government. It only notified the Syrian government about the airstrikes. So we're speaking here about a united effort by Syria and Russia, legitimate effort to fight terrorism, and definitely it will make fruitful results on the ground, because we're speaking here about coordination between troops on ground and also fighter jets in the air striking terrorism, not only ISIL but also other kind of linked and extremist militants on the ground.
So Russia, here we have a situation where Russia is now conducting airstrikes against targets in Syria. Is that going to make the situation even worse, or is it going to bring a resolution closer?
Well, as with everything in Syria today, it depends who you ask on the ground. Perhaps a lot of people in Damascus might be supportive of the airstrikes, and I know a lot of people along the coastline are also supportive of the airstrikes. But if you talk to the people who are on the receiving end of these airstrikes, let's say in the rebel-held areas around Homs, a lot of those people have civilians in the tens of thousands. It's rebel-controlled. There are civilians, perhaps more than 100,000, some say up to 200,000 in those specific areas where the Russian warplanes have been striking. You talk to those people, and no, they're not at all happy about the airstrikes. These are people who have already been under siege for 4 years and under constant bombardment from the Syrian Air Force also for 4 years, including the random barrel bombs that end up killing civilians.
Mohammed, let me ask you this. The United States' position has consistently been that Bashar al-Assad must go for there to be a resolution to this conflict in Syria. Is that going to happen at all? Is he prepared to enter into some kind of power-sharing agreement?
Well, the Syrian government made it clear, and particularly President Bashar al-Assad, he made it clear that it is not the US or any country in the world that has the right to decide for the Syrian people which president should rule or how the political system should be. This is the Syrian internal affair, and it requires, of course, the Syrian people to decide their future. Now, only the Syrians can decide who the president is, according to President Bashar al-Assad's vision, of course, through a dialogue between the Syrians themselves.
Russia, does the United States have a right to say that President Bashar al-Assad has to go?
Well, you know, these are politics. I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Mohammed is correct in saying that only the Syrian people can decide who the president is. The problem is the country is so fragmented and divided. We had an election last June, so a little over a year ago, the so-called election in Damascus, and that was a very problematic election. A lot of people didn't have access to the election polls if they're under siege, if they're in rebel-held areas. So it was sort of a mock election, so to speak. Only people in Damascus and government-controlled areas, and also Syrians who were in Lebanon, for example, who got the idea from rumors that the government never bothered to correct, They went to vote for President Assad thinking that if they didn't vote, they would get in trouble. So this becomes a problematic election.
Mohammed, we have a United States, rather a UN initiative right now to bring peace to Syria. The UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, has named the heads of 4 working groups that will start negotiations with the Syrian government. What hope is there that this could bring some kind of peace to the country?
Well, first of all, we know that Syria's Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim, addressing the United Nations just several days ago, he said that Syria agrees, the Syrian government agreed to take part in those groups according to the UN envoy's initiative, taking into consideration that the results are not obligatory. Those are just only talks in preparation for a wider dialogue between the Syrian people, between the Syrian government, and of course the so-called opposition forces, especially those that are foreign based. Now, regarding peace talks in general, the Syrian government, and particularly the Syrian president, just a couple of days ago, he was speaking to an Iranian news network. He told them that Russia 3 meetings for dialogue are very important for making Geneva 3 a success, because Russia 3 will be including opposition forces that are based inside Syria and others outside Syria. Not like Geneva 3, where only what the Syrian president called there were only opposition forces that are known to be agents and serving an agenda for countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United States. So the Syrian president made it clear that any peace talk should be based on having all the components of the Syrians speaking together, representatives of them.
Rasha, and of course, while all this is taking place, what is happening on the ground as far as the humanitarian situation is concerned?
You know, this has been going on for over 4 years. A lot of areas continue to be under siege. When the humanitarian aid tries to get in, it's usually at the mercy of government authorities, which often do not allow them access to these areas. I spoke to some people in rebel-held areas around Damascus, like in the Ghouta area, which was the scene of the chemical attack 2 years ago. And they tell me that now there's a whole new wartime black market economy where in order to bring in food and medicine, it's no longer smuggled per se, but it's openly paid, you know, you pay a hefty fee to the government authorities and the government checkpoint that's in charge of maintaining the siege on this area. And that's how the food and medicine enters those areas. And so it enters at 3 or 4 times the price that it would sell in government-controlled Damascus. So this is the situation for a lot of rebel-held areas that are near sort of Damascus and Homs. It continues. There's high infant mortality. There's all sorts of diseases affiliated with slow starvation. A lot of the civilians who have been able to leave have already left. So those who remain are really unable to flee. They're unable to join the exodus out of Syria and into Europe. So they're from their perspective, in many ways, they're sort of dead people walking. They, you know, they're awaiting death or victory from their mind.
And Mohammed, what does the view look like from Damascus as far as the humanitarian situation is concerned? We know that up to 240,000 people have died in this conflict. Millions have been displaced, have fled the country.
Yeah, the Syrian government has been distributing, along with humanitarian organizations, all kinds of medical needs and food aid to the civilians trapped inside. Take, for example, another area, Al-Qadam, which is also a militant-held area. There has been all kinds of food and medical assistance going inside to those areas, despite the fact that many of such assistance is going to the militants themselves. But the Syrian government feels responsible for the civilians inside, even if they are in militant-held areas. So you cannot say that all areas civilians are actually starting the Syrian government denying access. But let me
just chime in. But let me just clarify. I want to clarify one point, just because. You know, the tactic that's usually used by the Syrian authorities is that aid is allowed to go in, and then TV comes, state TV films it and everything, and then that is set as the example that aid is always allowed to go in. No, it's allowed to go in here and there once in a while, but for the majority of the time, for the majority of people,
no, it's not once in a while, no.
We're going to have to leave with Muhammad Ali in Damascus, Rasha Elass here with us in Washington. Thank you so much for